Hello, and thank you for joining us for the video companion series for the African Methodist Episcopal Church, A History, written by Dr. Dennis C. Dickerson, Sr. The focus of this video will be Chapter 1, Richard Allen and the Rise of African Methodism in the Atlantic World, 1760 to 1831. My name is Dennis C. Dickerson, Jr., a member of St. James AME Church in Memphis, Tennessee. The chapter begins with a section entitled The First African Methodists and the Spread of Methodism due to the mobility of Methodist preachers in British and American society. Of the hundreds of blacks in London, Scipio Africanus is said to be the first black Methodist period, circa 1739. The first black American convert was a slave named Betty from New York City, circa 1766. The number of black Methodists in the United States grew from 1,500 in 1784 to over 12,000 in 1797. By 1820, there were over 25,000 black Methodists in the Caribbean. Methodists learned early that Africans in the Atlantic world would embrace them. Francis Asbury, a bishop of the Methodist Episcopal Church, declared that Methodism would have been better off if they had preached only to Africans. In fact, Methodists were known for routinely authorizing blacks to preach. George Whitefield and Freeborn Garrison evangelized to and converted many blacks. Methodism spread to blacks throughout the Atlantic world, owing much to the mobility of black preachers such as John Morant, Cato Perkins, Boston King, Henry Evans, and Harry Hoosier. We learn more about Allen and Methodism in the Rise of Richard Allen section of the chapter. In 1784, Hoosier and Allen attended the Christmas conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church in Baltimore, the first general conference. This was a direct result of the success of the Methodist mission in America. The author is clear that Allen was a Methodist man who understood and practiced Wesleyan theology and its tenets such as social and spiritual holiness. Inherent in the Methodist ethos is to challenge inhumane practices such as slavery that violate the sanctity of the soul and the person whom God created. The practice of prejudice against blacks, to which many Methodists increasingly succumbed, was evidence of a spiritual declension that was manifested in raw racism. Now, a little on Allen's background. The Allen name derived from the slave owner William Allen, whose daughter married a Philadelphia attorney named Benjamin Chew. Chew, Allen's first owner, also owned a plantation in Delaware. A neighbor of that Delaware property named Stokely Sturgis purchased the Allens in 1768. Allen's conversion to Christianity in 1777 helped him deal with the ills of slavery, which he described as a bitter pill. Allen introduced Sturgis to Methodism and the preaching of Freeborn Garrison. Sturgis, moved by one of Garrison's sermons, found it unfit to own slaves and agreed to let Allen purchase his freedom, which he eventually did. He preached while he worked to buy his freedom throughout New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. He cut wood, he hauled salt, and worked in a brickyard. In his travels, he developed relationships with widening circles of Methodists. Section 3, Envisaging African Methodism, brings us closer to the founding of the church. In 1786, Allen preached at early services at St. George's Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. His preaching attracted 42 black followers who endorsed Allen starting an African American congregation. Allen saw white Methodists yielding to slavery and other hegemonic structures and noted the decline of the religion in the church. On a Sunday in 1787, the blacks were told to worship in the gallery of St. George's, but Allen, Absalom Jones, and others sat in their normal seats. A trustee pulled Absalom Jones up from his knees as he was praying, leading to the exodus of blacks from St. George's. Also in 1787, Allen and his followers organized the Free African Society, a mutual aid society that would become the venue through which Allen could start a church. Out of the Free African Society would be the African Episcopal Church, with Jones as its first rector, after Allen first declined the offer. Allen was true to Methodism. Even though he felt the church had lost its way, he wanted it to return to the Methodism he had experienced in Delaware at the time of his conversion. Jones and Allen exhibited the Wesleyan tenet of social holiness when aiding victims during the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. Having founded Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, an old blacksmith shop, Francis Asbury dedicated the new building in 1794. Despite opposition, Bethel became an independent institution with an African supplement added to its incorporation. Bethel trustees owned the property on which Bethel sat, not the Methodist Conference. Establishing African Methodism opens with Paul Cuffey, a Massachusetts black ship owner, and Allen promoting African immigration. Additionally, James Champion, a minister at Bethel, Daniel Coker, a leader of Black Methodists in Baltimore, and Allen noted the racial conflict with Black Methodists not only at St. George's, but in other locales such as Baltimore. Coker broke away from white Methodists in Baltimore and established a separate congregation. Delegates from Baltimore and other places met in Philadelphia to unite and form the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Coker was elected the first bishop, but declined, possibly due to his Caucasian features. Allen was subsequently elected and consecrated the first bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Around this same time in 1813, Peter Spencer of Wilmington, Delaware, formed the Union Church of Africans. Also, James Varick, Christopher Rush, and other founders withdrew from John Street Church in New York City and founded their own chapel. Thus, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church formed in 1821. The AME Church grew and spread to other parts of Pennsylvania, New York, and Ohio. Allen and Coker also envisioned expansion possibilities in Africa and the Caribbean. This final section, entitled An Emancipation Ethos, begins discussing the dense number of blacks in the Atlantic world, some expatriates whom Allen assisted. For example, 25 Jamaicans were sent to Allen and were welcomed into Bethel Church. Also, Allen and his first wife Flora, an ex-slave, aided slaves, including one belonging to George and Martha Washington. Allen's visibility increased as an opponent of slavery. Morris Brown's South Carolina AME congregation included Denmark Vesey as a member and class leader. Vesey, a former slave from St. Thomas, won the lottery and bought his freedom. Vesey's slave revolt was developed under the cloak of AME class meetings. It is suggested that Brown knew about the plot. Subsequently, the plot was revealed, and Vesey and others were hanged. Brown sought refuge with Allen in Philadelphia at Bethel. He became an associate minister at Bethel, and Allen would consecrate him as the second bishop of the AME Church. Meanwhile, Allen aligned himself with organizations with emancipationist efforts. Bethel hosted the first ever National Convention of Colored Persons. In addition, Allen supported the free produce movement, which aimed at boycotting goods derived from slave labor. The AME discipline was published in 1817, mostly adopted from the discipline of white Wesleyans. The author is intentional in highlighting Allen's view of hymnody as integral to AME worship. These songs communicate the gospel, energize faith, and enhance worship. This final part describes conflict Allen encountered at this early stage of the church's founding. A man named Jonathan Tudis accused Allen of seeking financial and ecclesiastical control in dealing with the AME Church, serving as bishop and treasurer of Bethel until 1820 and not relinquishing his pastorate. There is speculation about his motive. Then, Jarena Lee, a member of Bethel, told Allen she was called to preach. Allen told her the discipline said nothing about a call for women to preach. One day, Lee spontaneously completed the sermon of an exhausted exhorter and convinced Bishop Allen she was inspired by the Holy Spirit. Allen admitted he was wrong and wrote testimonials attesting to her legitimacy as a preacher and had her preach throughout the Northeast. This concludes the Chapter 1 summary. Now please join Dr. Christina Dickerson-Cousin as she interviews our dynamic panel of AME scholars, clergy, and lay. Feel free to submit your questions and comments via Facebook Live. Thank you.